The mourners didn't even see the scruffy dog arrive until he placed a single paw on the coffin, and everything stopped. The first light of morning crept over the rows of weathered headstones as a lone figure slipped through the cemetery gates. Damp air clung to patches of grass, and low clouds blurred the horizon into a wash of gray. Mourners clustered near the front of the gathering, voices hushed and eyes reddened, while the coffin rested on a sturdy stand draped in crisp white linen. They did not notice the dog at the edge of the lawn, a medium-sized mutt with matted fur the color of ash, ears tipped forward, and eyes that held a patient, knowing glint. Take a second to subscribe. It really helps. Thanks. Now back to the story. He paused at the edge of the paved path, nostrils flaring as he took in the swirl of unfamiliar scents. Polished boots, fragrant lilies, the damp earth freshly turned. A distant toll of the chapel bell counted the seconds until the service would begin. Slowly, he padded forward on silent paws, weaving between visitors and folding chairs, his gaze fixed on that draped coffin like a moth drawn to a flickering flame. A mother's hand tightened around her daughter's shoulder as they approached, the child's gaze dragging toward the newcomer. Yet the mourners kept their focus on each other, offering comfort and condolences, unaware of the dog that moved steadily closer. A gust of wind fluttered discarded programs across the grass. The dog halted for a heartbeat, then pressed on, each step measured and unwavering. Near the front row, a slight tremor of movement caught the eye of an elderly man in a dark suit. He frowned, then leaned forward as the dog's muzzle brushed the wooden rail surrounding the casket. The brief contact sent a ripple through the assembled guests. Conversations stuttered and stopped. Someone gasped. It was as though the animal's silent request had cleaved through their veil of grief, drawing every eye toward him. He lifted his head, nostrils quivering, and exhaled a soft waft that sounded almost like a sigh. Heads turned, and the hush deepened into reverent stillness. In that moment between heartbeats, the dog's simple act of arrival, unannounced and unstoppable, hung in the dawn's pale light, a quiet herald of something unspoken yet profoundly understood. Fog curled between the tombstones as the mourners settled again, startled by the dog's bold advance. He remained at the foot of the coffin, body unmoving, eyes fixed on the polished surface as if guarding a slumbering friend. Beneath his calm exterior, each breath rose in soft puffs, visible in the chill morning air. The minister resumed his reading, voice steady but hushed, the words of comfort slipping into the quiet like pebbles in still water. Yet many found their attention wavering, drawn back to the dog's unwavering presence. A cluster of flowers lay nearby, a wreath of white roses and blue irises. But it was the dog who commanded the vigil. He did not whine or bark. He simply sat, front paws side by side, as though honoring an unspoken pact. A gust of wind rattled the chapel doors, and the mourners shivered. A young widow wrapped her shawl tighter and glanced down, noticing for the first time the badge of loyalty glinting on the dog's worn collar. His posture was regal, his head held high despite the scrape of sorrow in his gaze. It was as though he understood the ritual, the gravity of loss, and stood sentinel in its stead. Children dared only to whisper as they tiptoed past him. An elderly woman, knuckles white around a walking stick, paused and offered a tentative pat. The dog's eyes flickered toward her, then returned to the coffin. She withdrew her hand as if startled by the intimacy of his trust. Somewhere beyond the cemetery wall, a train whistle echoed, and the dog's ears twitched. But he did not follow the sound. Instead, he remained tethered by loyalty stronger than chains, his vigil an unspoken testament to a bond that defied explanations. The service moved toward its close, the final hymn, the blessing, the benediction, but still no one spoke to shoo him away. As the last notes faded and the minister closed his book, a hush settled over the assembly. The dog rose, stretched his shoulders, and let his gaze drift upward to the gathering of bowed heads. Then, without hesitation, he settled back onto his haunches, signaling that his watch was far from over. In that silent vigil, the mourners glimpsed the depth of devotion that no human voice could fully capture. The family arrived in a slow procession, faces pale and eyes hollow from days of sleepless worry. They paused at the edge of the gathering, hesitant to join the sea of black coats and trembling embraces. A sister brushed a tear away with the back of her hand as a brother offered a stiff nod to distant cousins. None of them glanced down the slope to where the dog remained steadfast. They drew near the coffin, and the air grew thick with whispered apologies and attempts at composure. The widow's cheeks glistened, and a mother pressed a handkerchief to her lips. Flowers were laid with trembling fingers, lilies, peonies, a spray of forget-me-nots. The family's grief swirled around them like a storm, each gust carrying memories of laughter, arguments, shared dinners. A frail grandfather, supported by two young nieces, leaned over the rail to kiss the polished wood. "Rest well, my boy," he whispered, voice cracking. Then he straightened, blinking against the tears, and paused as a low woof drifted to his ears. His gaze dropped to the dog, still crouched at the head of the coffin, expression solemn. He blinked once, then twice, and took a cautious step forward. Behind him, the family stirred, turning to see what had captured their patriarch's attention. At first, there was confusion. A stray animal among the mourners? Voices lifted in disbelief as the grandfather reached out a trembling hand and gently stroked the dog's head. The animal leaned into the touch, eyes softening, as though offering his own consolation. In that moment, the funeral's center of gravity shifted. The family, torn between sorrow and surprise, closed ranks around the dog. The widow knelt so that both her and the animal were level with the coffin, head bowed in shared reverence. A brother crouched beside her, placing a hand on the dog's back as if recognizing a kindred spirit. Speechless, they allowed themselves a brief connection with this silent mourner. His gentle presence offered a balm to their fractured hearts, a reminder that love and loyalty endure beyond human words. As the wind stilled and the funeral rites pressed on, the family stood closer together, held in an unspoken embrace by the dog whose grief mirrored their own. A breeze carried a swirl of petals across the grass as the mourners prepared for the next ritual. The minister stepped aside, and the family gathered to exchange shared memories. In the front row, a little girl perched on the edge of her mother's skirt, her wide eyes drifting toward the solemn dog curled at the foot of the casket. The girl's gaze lingered, curiosity stirring behind her tear-streaked cheeks. She nudged her mother, who gently pulled her closer. "Look," the girl whispered, pointing with a small finger. The mother glanced, frowning at first, then softened as she saw the animal's intense stare fixed on the coffin. "He's just a dog," she murmured reassuringly, but her voice held uncertainty. The child's eyes bore into the dog's face, searching for an answer beyond fur and whiskers. The dog's amber eyes reflected something deeper, memory, perhaps, or longing. At that moment, a shaft of pale sunlight broke through the clouds and illuminated the dog's form, spotlighting him in a way that drew gasps from the onlookers. For the first time, the congregation truly saw him, not as a stray, but as an invited guest of emotional magnitude. The girl's curiosity overcame her fear. She tiptoed forward, skirts rustling, until she was only a few feet away. She cocked her head, studying the dog's stillness. He lifted one ear in acknowledgement and tilted his head slightly, as though listening to a question that only he could understand. The child smiled softly, and the dog's tail thumped once in response. A murmur spread as others noticed the interaction. Phones were lifted, hesitant photographs taken, but the solemn atmosphere held them back from breaking silence. The girl took another step, eyes wide with wonder, and noticed a faint scar above the dog's eye, an old injury healed. She pressed a finger to her lips, inviting hush, then reached out carefully, offering the gentlest of rubs. The dog closed his eyes at her touch, leaning into the comfort. A ripple of emotion passed through the mourners. In that curious glance between child and canine, the crowd glimpsed a simple truth. Grief is not born of speech alone, but of shared presence. The child's quiet bravery had revealed the dog's purpose, to stand as sentinel for the heart, bearing witness to farewells no eulogy could fully capture. Soft murmurs rippled through the congregation as guests shifted in their seats, eyes drifting from the grieving family back to the dog. A woman behind them leaned forward, whispering to her husband, "Where did he come from?" The man shrugged, brow furrowed, as his gaze remained fixed on the animal's unwavering posture. Nearby, two elderly friends exchanged theories in hushed tones. "He must belong to someone here," one whispered. "Or perhaps he was the deceased companion. Remember how he loved that old shelter dog?" The second nodded, voice trembling. "It would explain why he's here now." Loyalty never dies. A cluster of teenagers, awkward in their formal attire, hovered at the edge of the group. One dared to venture closer, ducking behind a floral arrangement. She nudged her friend, both of them craning their necks to glimpse the scar above the dog's eye and the threadbare collar around its neck. "He looks so dignified," she breathed, "like he understands what's happening." Behind them, a businessman on his phone paused mid-swipe, glancing up at the dog as if questioning his own priorities. His fingers hovered over the screen, confusion replacing the impatience he'd worn since arriving late. A faint smile flickered across his features before he silenced his phone and tucked it away. At the fringes, the cemetery groundskeeper, a stooped man in a faded uniform, leaned on his spade. He watched the dog with a knowing look, as though recalling a story long buried. He cleared his throat softly, then tipped his hat, offering a quiet salute of respect before returning to his duties. Even the minister, preparing the final prayer, paused to fold his hands around the pulpit. His voice, when it resumed, carried a depth of empathy he hadn't intended to convey. In that moment, the dog had altered the mood of every soul present, weaving a thread of shared wonder through their sorrow. As the whispers grew into a gentle chorus of speculation and awe, the dog remained seated, content to let the humans puzzle over his presence. His mission was simple: to stand witness, reminding everyone that grief and love transcend human speech. Sometimes they speak loudest through silence and the quiet solidarity of a faithful friend. The officiant lifted his head, eyes drifting from his open Bible to the dog seated at the foot of the casket. His throat tightened as he realized the congregation's gazes had shifted. Even the grieving family watched with rapt attention. He cleared his throat, closing the book with a soft thud. A hush fell over the gathering. The minister's usual poise gave way to something more human: hesitation. His voice faltered for a heartbeat, then steadied as he spoke again, voice warmer and quieter than before. "We gather here not only to mourn a life taken from us," he began, glancing toward the faithful canine sentinel, "but to celebrate a bond that death cannot sever." He paused once more, letting the words settle, eyes meeting those of the dog. The animal met his gaze without flinching, ears tilting as though absorbing each syllable. There was an unspoken understanding between them. The minister provided solace with words, the dog with presence. Adjusting his collar, the officiant stepped closer to the pulpit, then set aside his prepared remarks. "In my years of service," he said, voice resonant, "I have spoken of love and loss, of memories and healing. Yet today, I see a teacher among us, one who needs no sermon to speak of loyalty and compassion." Heads nodded, tears glistened, and the minister's eyes softened. He lowered himself onto the kneeler beside the casket and extended a hand toward the dog. The congregation leaned in collectively, breath held. The dog rose and padded forward, resting his head in the minister's lap. A collective intake of breath rippled through the mourners. The minister stroked the dog's ears, expression gentle. "Thank you," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. Rising with the dog at his side, the officiant returned to the pulpit. "Let us remember that grief takes many forms," he said, voice steady again, "and sometimes comfort arrives on four paws." A quiet smile curved his lips as he surveyed the faces before him, now etched with a shared warmth. In that unexpected pause, the ceremony shifted from ritual to revelation, reminding every heart present that solace can come from the simplest of gestures and that love endures beyond the final farewell. He rose deliberately and took a single step toward the coffin as though drawn by an unseen tether. The polished wood gleamed beneath the soft ribbon of morning light, and I tracked his motion. Some gasped, others held their breath. His coat bristled in the chill, and his paws made no sound on the dewy grass. The officiant and family watched, transfixed, as the dog approached. He halted just short of the casket, head lowered respectfully, tail swaying in a slow, measured arc. A hush blanketed the cemetery, broken only by the distant toll of the chapel bell and the quickening breaths of onlookers. In that suspended moment, he embodied every unspoken feeling in the assembly's collective heart. He turned his head slightly, glancing at the grieving widow who stood by the coffin's side. Her tear-stained face softened when their eyes met. Tentatively, she reached a hand toward him. He stepped forward again, closing the distance, and allowed her to stroke his fur. The contact seemed to ease something in her, a fraction of the ache released. She leaned down, pressing her cheek against his shoulder, and whispered a soft thank you. Encouraged, the brother knelt too, wrapping an arm around the widow's shoulders as he spoke gentle words of comfort to both woman and dog. The siblings shared a glance, realizing this creature had become a bridge between loss and solace. Others began to move forward, drawing close enough to touch him, to feel the warmth of his body and the steady beat of his heart. Even the stern-faced groundskeeper paused in his work, leaning on his shovel as he watched a small crowd form around the animal. Strangers knelt in the grass, hands outstretched, and found themselves murmuring thanks and apologies alike, words they had withheld in grief until now. When the final mourner had stepped beside him, the dog settled on his haunches, closing his eyes as if claiming this moment. The family formed a rough circle around the coffin and the silent sentinel, a community united not just by loss, but by the unwavering loyalty of a dog who had stepped forward when all else seemed impossible. He paused, ears lifting as if sensing the shift in the air. A soft murmur rose among the mourners as they noticed something extraordinary. A tear rolled down the dog's muzzle, glistening in the muted light. It wasn't a trick of the morning dew, but a single droplet of sorrow. Gasps rippled through the family. The sister, voice trembling, whispered, "He's crying." The widow's hand flew to her mouth, eyes widening. The dog's gaze, once fixed on the coffin, now met their own, brimming with shared grief. It was as if he carried every unspoken feeling and laid it bare in that single, fragile tear. The brother knelt beside the dog, catching the tear on the pad of his finger. He held it up as though it were a precious gem, proof of a bond deeper than any words. Lips quivering, he spoke to the animal. "You loved him too, didn't you?" The dog rested his head on the man's knee and exhaled a whisper of a breath. Mourners edged closer, forming a half-circle around the trio. A hush settled, so profound it felt sacred. Cameras were lowered, whispers stilled, and even the wind seemed to pause, honoring the moment. The dog's eyes closed briefly, then opened wide with a clarity that pierced every heart. The officiant, kneeling at the rail, removed his glasses and dabbed at his eyes. "True loyalty," he murmured, voice thick, knows no bounds. He offered a gentle bow to the dog, acknowledging his place in the ceremony. Nearby, an elderly guest rose unsteadily, hands pressed together as though in prayer. "Bless you, friend," she said, voice soft and reverent. She approached and placed a single white rose beside the dog's paw. He looked down at the bloom, sniffed it, then nudged it gently toward the coffin, an offering from one loyal soul to another. In that moment, the dog's heartache became theirs, and their shared recognition wove a thread through every mourner's soul. Grief loosened its grip just enough to allow hope and gratitude to swim beneath the surface. The dog, once unnoticed, now stood at the center of collective affection, a silent testament to the power of love that transcends even the final farewell. A soft rustle broke the reverent silence as an elderly woman stepped forward, her trembling hands clasping an old photograph. She held it aloft, revealing a youthful man beside a scruffy dog with the same scar above its eye. Gasps rippled through the crowd as recognition dawned. The photograph had been tucked inside the late man's Bible, forgotten until the widow discovered it. The widow unfolded the brittle image, her fingers tracing the edges. "That was him," she whispered, voice choked. "And that was him." She nodded toward the dog, whose ears perked at the sound of his name, as though memory stirred within. The family gathered around, leaning in to study the faded black and white scene. A camping trip by a mountain lake, two inseparable companions smiling into the camera. A cousin fetched the Bible, opening it to a marked page where the photograph had been pressed. On the facing page, a penciled note read, "My best friend, protector, and guide." The handwriting wavered with age, but carried unmistakable love. The dog sniffed at the margin, then looked up, amber eyes glistening as if recalling a promise made long ago. Children clustered at the edges, listening intently as the officiant recounted the story from memory. How the deceased had rescued the stray pup from a roadside ditch, nursed him through sickness, and vowed never to part ways. They had shared every adventure for a decade, hiking rocky trails, camping under starlit skies, returning home side by side. When the man fell ill, the dog refused to leave his bedside, offering comfort in the darkest hours. Tears blurred the edges of the photograph as the widow raised her gaze to the mourners. "He asked me once," she said softly, "what loyalty truly meant. He said it's standing by someone, even when they can't stand by themselves." The dog shifted, nudging the Bible into her lap, as though offering himself as testament. The family embraced, drawing close around the coffin and the silent canine. In that moment of unveiling, the past and present merged, revealing the depth of a friendship that death could not sever. The mourners understood that the dog was not an interloper, but the living embodiment of a promise, eternal, unwavering, and undeniably true. Morning light shifted as the minister concluded the tale of friendship. A hush fell once more, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves in a light breeze. The dog lingered beside the Bible, eyes glassy with remembrance. Then, as if compelled by an unseen force, he rose and approached the coffin's side. He stretched one front leg and pressed a single paw against the polished surface. It was a gentle nudge, so slight that many mourners mistook it for a tremor in the wood. But the family saw, the widow gasped, and the sister leaned forward, hand over her heart. The paw print left no mark, yet its significance was undeniable, a final touch from one faithful soul to another. The brother stepped back, voice catching. "He wants you to know he's still here," he whispered to the widow. She placed a trembling hand atop the dog's head, then rested it on the coffin. The minister knelt beside them, head bowed, as if honoring a sacred rite. Guests rose organically, drawn forward by the subtle gesture. A mother helped her fidgeting children step between chairs for a better view, and an elderly man used his cane to steady himself as he shuffled closer. Each mourner carried a silent question in their eyes. What does this mean? The dog, sensing their collective anticipation, held his ground. A little boy, no more than 6, edged forward and offered the dog a small daisy he had plucked from the wreath. The dog accepted it by leaning down and sniffing gently, then lifted his head and placed the bloom on the coffin beside his paw. A soft murmur of awe rippled through the crowd, another offering from animal to human, bridging their grief. The wind picked up, scattering petals and program sheets alike. The dog's tail thumped once, twice, and settled into a rhythmic pulse that matched the mourner's collective heartbeat. Eyes met eyes across the sea of faces, tears shining with shared understanding. In that gentle nudge, the dog had spoken louder than any eulogy. Love survives even the deepest sorrow, manifesting in the smallest acts. The mourners drew in a collective breath and nodded, as though embracing a universal truth. The dog, having completed his silent message, sat back on his haunches, content to continue his vigil until every friend had felt his last farewell. Soft sobs and quiet inhalations rose among the mourners as the dog settled back beside the coffin, eyes bright and unwavering. A woman near the front dabbed at her cheeks, voice trembling. "He's reminding us," her friend, hand clasped over her heart, finished the thought, "that we're not alone in our grief." A ripple of tears spread through the congregation. The minister paused, hand on the pulpit, as he watched the silent canine comfort the family. Even strangers reached for handkerchiefs, offering them to one another in a chain of empathy. Murmurs drifted like a gentle wind. "It's as if he knows our sorrow," someone whispered. "He's carrying it for us." The widow leaned into her brother's embrace, tears tracing rivulets down her cheeks. She looked down at the dog and managed a shaky smile. "Thank you," she murmured, voice thick. The dog's tail thumped softly in response, his head resting against her ankle. An elderly woman in the second row, face lined with years of loss, rose unsteadily and approached. She knelt beside the animal, pressing her hand to his flank. "Oh, dear heart," she said, voice quavering, "you've done more for us today than words ever could." The dog closed his eyes, absorbing the tenderness. Across the grass, two teenagers exchanged a glance, tears pooling in their eyes. One wiped her nose on her sleeve and whispered, "I never believed in comfort like this." Her friend nodded, voice soft, "Me neither. But look at him." Even the steadiness of the groundskeeper faltered. He leaned on his shovel, brows damp, and nodded toward the dog. "You've earned your place among us," he murmured. "Thank you for standing by him." A hush fell as the minister cleared his throat and began the final blessing. His voice, though steady, wavered with emotion. "May we carry his memory as faithfully as this companion carries our grief," he intoned, glancing at the dog. "And may we, like him, be present for one another." As the congregation bowed their heads, the dog closed his eyes and exhaled a soft woof. In that moment of shared tears and murmurs, the mourners found solace in the presence of a single, steadfast friend whose loyalty spoke directly to their hearts. The family stood in a hesitant cluster, uncertainty flickering across their faces as they watched the dog remain steadfast at the casket's edge. The widow's hand hovered above the polished wood, fingers trembling, but she drew back, glancing at her brother and sister as though seeking permission. Her sister swallowed, eyes bright. "Should we?" she began, voice unsteady. The brother exhaled slowly, posture stiff. He nodded once, then shook his head, torn between grief and caution. "I don't know," he admitted, voice low. "I've never seen anything like this." A mourner's respectful distance surrounded them, creating a small island of stillness. The dog sat poised, head tilted slightly, as if urging them forward, offering a bridge across their fear of the unknown. For a moment, the family sorrow seemed eclipsed by their hesitation, wondering whether to embrace this unexpected mourner or retreat into their own pain. The mother finally stepped forward, tentative steps leaving shallow depressions in the dewy grass. Her eyes filled with tears as she reached for the dog's collar. He leaned into her touch, warmth radiating through his fur. She exhaled a soft sob, and her shoulders relaxed. Encouraged, her children moved closer, shy and wide-eyed, then knelt to stroke his back. The widow's gaze lingered on the dog's scarred brow, then drifted to the Bible, the photograph, and the gentle paw prints left at the coffin's side. The evidence of a shared past tugged at her heart. Drawing a steadying breath, she knelt and placed her palm over his. In that single gesture, her hesitation melted into acceptance. Her brother and sister followed suit, each laying a hand on the dog's head or flank. The symbolic circle closed as they collectively acknowledged his place among them. The dog exhaled, as though releasing the tension that had held them back, and nudged the widow's hand, guiding it to the coffin rail. A hushed murmur of approval rose from the onlookers. Even those at the back leaned forward, recognizing the shift in the family's posture. from guarded remembrance to open-hearted connection. In that quiet moment of shared vulnerability, the family overcame their hesitation and welcomed the dog fully into their circle of grief and love. They led him gently around the casket until the grass beneath them felt solid again. The widow knelt first, her knees pressing into the damp earth. The dog rose and padded closer, leaning his head against her shoulder. She wrapped an arm around his neck, closing her eyes as tears mingled with grass stains on her coat. Her brother crouched beside them, one hand resting on the dog's back, the other on his sister's shoulder. He ran his fingers through the dog's fur as though reconnecting strands of a shared history, murmuring a soft apology for all the years he had taken their companion for granted. The dog pressed into him, offering solace through warmth and presence. Their father, stooped and gray, lowered himself to one knee. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a worn leather collar studded with metal tags, one of them matching the dog's scar. With trembling hands, he slipped it around the animal's neck, fastening it snugly. The dog wagged his tail once, then patted around to rest his head in the old man's lap, eyes shining with recognition. The mother found her place on the other side, kneeling so that each member formed a loose semicircle. She unwrapped the shawl from her shoulders and draped it gently over the dog's back. He exhaled, filling the shawl with a quiet warmth as though accepting both comfort and tribute. A hush settled over the gathering as the family embraced the dog together, bodies pressed close in a circle of reclaimed love. Their tears fell freely now, unguarded and healing. The dog closed his eyes, head nestled against the widow's chest, his steady breathing synchronizing with theirs. In that reunion on the ground, they were no longer separate souls bound by grief. They were a unit woven together by memories, loss, and unwavering loyalty. The dog's soft whine of contentment rose above the silent cemetery, a final unspoken vow that he would stand by them until every wound found its peace. And in that circle of tender reunion, every heart found a measure of comfort, tethered to love that outlasts even the quietest goodbyes. A hush fell as the family rose and stepped back, creating a path toward the cemetery's exit. The dog remained kneeling, head bowed beside the coffin, as if reluctant to let go. The widow swallowed, eyes meeting his with unspoken gratitude and sorrow. Without a word, she bent down and kissed the top of his head. The dog responded with a soft woof, lifting his muzzle to brush against her cheek. It was neither a goodbye nor an embrace, but something in between, a farewell spoken in the language of hearts. The brother laid a hand on the dog's shoulder one last time, fingertips trembling. The dog leaned into the touch, offering strength. The sister pressed her palm against his flank, then drew back, eyes glistening. He exhaled, a warm breath mingling with the cool air. The father stepped forward, removed his hat, and held it to his chest. He looked down at the dog, silhouette framed by the rising sun, and nodded once. The dog lifted his head, ears pricked, acknowledging the gesture. In that instant, ceremony and instinct merged into a single moment of respect. The group began to move, the widow pausing beside the coffin for a final glance. The dog rose gracefully at the same pace, matching her step for step. They walked in silent tandem, two figures bound by grief, moving toward acceptance. As they reached the gate, the dog halted and sat, eyes fixed on the family's departing backs. The widow turned and crouched one last time, meeting his gaze. Her lips curved into a sad smile. He thumped his tail once in response, a heartbeat of reassurance. She straightened and continued onward, shoulders squared against the weight of loss, leaving the dog perched like a sentinel at the threshold. He watched until they faded from view, then exhaled deeply. No words were exchanged, yet the farewell was complete. In that unspoken moment, they had shared all that needed saying. Love remembered, loyalty honored, and grief gently released into the earth. The dog remained, a silent guardian of memories now laid to rest, embodying the timeless bond that even death could not dissolve. The cemetery emptied, leaving only a scattering of petals on the pathway. The dog remained kneeling beside the coffin for a moment longer, head low, until the last echo of footsteps faded. Then he rose and padded quietly among the remaining mourners, offering himself as a bridge between their sorrow and a fragile hope. A woman bent to retrieve a fallen program from the grass and found herself face to face with the dog. Startled, she dropped to one knee and held out a trembling hand. He sniffed her fingers, then leaned in to rest his muzzle against her palm. She closed her eyes and let out a soft sob, drawing comfort from the simple warmth against her hand. Nearby, the groundskeeper bagged discarded flower stems and paused when the dog approached. He bent, offering a gentle scratch behind the dog's ear. The animal leaned into the touch, eyes half closed. The man straightened and sighed, "Thank you, friend," as though the dog's presence had eased the day's burden for them both. On the opposite side, a young man lingered, shoulders hunched, lost in thought. The dog nudged him softly, prompting the man to look down. Their eyes met, steady, clear, and patient. The man managed a small smile and knelt. He ran his fingers along the dog's neck, murmuring, "You saved me today, too." The dog's tail thumped once, and he settled beside the young man as if offering silent counsel. Even the minister lingered by the open grave, hands clasped behind his back. The dog approached him, stepping close enough that the minister could see the faint tremble in the animal's jowls. He knelt, placing a hand over the dog's chest. "Your loyalty teaches us," he whispered, voice low. The dog rested his head in the minister's lap, still and steady. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the grounds, the dog moved gracefully from mourner to mourner. Each reached out in turn, fingers brushing fur, hands finding solace in his warmth. Children's tears stilled at his side, and elders found renewed strength to stand tall. When the last mourner departed, the dog sat alone by the empty casket stand. He glanced once more at the carved stone before slipping through the gates into the waning light. His consoling presence had turned grief into shared compassion, a reminder that even in the deepest sorrow, a faithful friend could kindle the first spark of healing. The minister stood alone by the now empty stand, the lingering scent of lilies and fresh earth surrounding him. In his hand, he cradled the Bible, its pages marked by the photograph he had placed back inside. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, recalling the faithful dog's every gesture, the gentle nudge, the tear, the soothed hand. His mind drifted to sermons delivered and rites performed, and he realized that words, for all their power, had fallen short this morning. The dog had spoken a language beyond Scripture, a language of presence, instinct, and unwavering devotion. It had been a lesson he would carry long after the flowers wilted and the grave settled into silence. He opened the Bible to the penciled note, "My best friend, protector, and guide." The words stood out in faded ink, testifying to a bond that transcended human understanding. Placing the photograph gently between the pages, he whispered a prayer of gratitude for the life now at rest and for the creature who had honored it so profoundly. Stepping away from the grave, he surveyed the empty rows of headstones. The wind stirred, rustling the pages of his Bible and the loose petals still scattered on the ground. He wondered how many hearts had been shifted today, how many souls had tasted comfort they thought forever lost. He had spent years guiding others through grief, offering solace through scripture and song. But today, it was the silent presence of a dog that had illuminated the path from sorrow to healing. In his homily, he would weave this truth, that compassion often arrives unannounced, sometimes on 4 paws rather than 2 feet. Pocketing the Bible, he stepped onto the path leading from the cemetery. Above him, the sky brightened, light breaking through the clouds in slender gold shafts. In that moment of reflection, he understood that faith could take many forms, and that tomorrow, when the congregation gathered again, their hearts would hold a new image of devotion forever bound to a silent sentinel at the casket. With a final look back, the minister turned and walked on, carrying the day's unexpected miracle in his spirit and the promise of compassion in every step. The following morning, the daughter sorted through old albums in the family living room, searching for memories to share at the memorial gathering. One by one, she set photographs on the coffee table. Birthday parties where the deceased grinned beside his dog, snapshots of camping trips with the same scruffy companion bounding over logs, and candid frames of rainy day walks under matching umbrellas. Each image revealed a chapter of their shared story. Her mother entered, eyes red-rimmed, but determined. She paused by the table, lifting a picture of her husband tossing a stick as the dog leaped midair. "He never missed," she whispered, voice thick. The daughter nodded, tracing the outline of the dog's ears with her fingertip. He said Rusty taught him patience. Their father joined them, carrying a framed photograph from his office, himself in uniform beside his best friend and the dog. He said on the table, voice soft, this was taken just before deployment. They both came home. Tears welled as they stood together, the photographs radiating the bond that had shaped their lives. Later, the neighbor arrived with a memory box, old film rolls and Polaroids collected over the years. The widow loaded them onto a digital scanner, and soon a slideshow flickered on the TV. The dog's antics chasing snowflakes, lying protectively beside the deceased's hospital bed, resting his chin on a shoelace as if guarding it. Mourners gathered, drawn into the warmth of the memories. Children laughed through tears as they recognized the dog bounding through sprinklers, and elders murmured about loyalty and loss. A close friend spoke up. He once said that dog was more than a pet. He was family. Heads nodded. Someone added, he was never alone. The slideshow paused on a black and white image, the dog sitting solemnly at the spouse's graduation ceremony, proud and patient. In that frozen moment, the family saw a lifetime of devotion distilled into one frame. The widow whispered, he was always there, wasn't he? The daughter pressed her hand to her heart. As the room settled into reflective silence, the photographs had woven the dog's presence into the tapestry of their lives. Memories, once scattered in dusty drawers, now stood vivid and alive, proof that love, captured in a moment, endures far beyond the final goodbye. The sun dipped low behind the trees as the memorial concluded, and guests drifted toward the front door, exchanging final condolences. The family gathered in the foyer, hands clasped, eyes glassy. The dog remained near the entrance, silent and steady, as though waiting for permission to go. A hush fell when the widow knelt beside him. She smoothed his fur, voice soft, go where you need to. The dog lifted his head, amber eyes meeting hers, then looked past her toward the empty street. Outside, the wind rustled through the oaks, carrying the scent of dusk and promise of rain. The dog rose and slipped through the open door with quiet grace. No one followed. The moment felt sacred, meant for farewells spoken in the hush of parting. The daughter watched from the threshold, heart clenched. The dog paused on the front step, turning back once, as if to seal an unspoken bond. Then he stepped down onto the walkway, paws making no sound on the flagstones. The mother approached, tears glinting in the fading light. She bent and placed a gentle kiss atop his head. The dog trembled for a heartbeat, then lifted his chin and nudged her hand. A soft woof drifted in the twilight. He padded forward, each stride measured, tail low but steady. At the curb, he hesitated, gazing at the family frame by the doorway. A lamppost flickered on, casting a warm circle of light around him. The dog sat, head cocked in farewell, then rose once more. With deliberate calm, he turned away, silhouette slender against the street lamps. He walked down the lane, leaving behind the echo of his passing in the still air. Watches were raised, cameras lowered, as watchers held their breath, letting the image sink in, the loyal companion returning to whatever journey lay ahead. The widow closed the door softly, drawing her family into a circle. Inside, the hearth glowed with embers, offering warmth where sorrow had reigned. Outside, the dog disappeared into the gathering shadows, his departure as quiet as his vigil, carrying the memory of love's unspoken promise into the night. The following week, under a bright spring sky, the family returned to the cemetery for a private moment at the grave. Wildflowers nodded between headstones, and the air was alive with bird song, a gentle reminder that life continued beyond sorrow. The widow knelt at the footstone, placing fresh lilies upon the soil. A soft patting announced the dog's arrival. He emerged from the hedgerows as if summoned, coat gleaming in the sunlight. His eyes held a calm expectation, and he sat obediently beside her, tail resting against the ground. She reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a small silver key attached to a leather strap. "I promised I'd find you," she murmured, pressing the key into his collar. "And I promise, no matter where you go, you'll never be alone again." Her voice quivered with emotion, yet carried a note of resolute warmth. The brother joined them, placing a hand on the widow's shoulder. Together, they stood and faced the grave, each laying a hand atop the dog's head. He leaned into their touch, eyes closing briefly in contentment.